Space was supposed to be the great equalizer. Out there, in the black silence between the stars, size, wealth, and empire meant nothing when you were staring down the infinite. But that illusion shattered the moment the fleets arrived. Not human fleets. No, they came from far beyond, from civilizations that had been sailing the void long before our first radio signals brushed against the cosmic shore. They came armored, proud, and absolutely certain of their superiority. And humanity, small and new by galactic standards, had the audacity to stand in their way. The first time their ships appeared over Mars' orbit, they didn't even bother with greetings. The translation bands lit up with a single broadcast. "You are in violation of territorial expansion laws." That was it. Cold, mechanical, dismissive. As if they were talking to a lesser species who'd stumbled into forbidden territory. We'd spent centuries dreaming of meeting other life forms, imagining first contact filled with curiosity and wonder. Instead, it came with the click of targeting systems and the hum of charging plasma cannons. The aliens, later identified as the Tarsal Dominion, were a race of hardened, armor-bound giants who believed that power was the only language worth speaking. Their ships gleamed with composite plating thicker than any human dreadnought, layered with alloys that shrugged off micrometeorite impacts like dust. Their engineers boasted that their hulls could withstand direct hits from their own beam weapons. To them, humanity was little more than a primitive nuisance, an upstart species punching above its weight. But humans are stubborn. We always have been. When the first Tarsal ships breached Earth's defensive perimeter, humanity didn't surrender. The United Terran Command had something new, something untested. Railguns, massive magnetic cannons capable of hurling tungsten slugs at a fraction of light speed. They weren't elegant. They weren't graceful. They were brutal. And when the first salvo tore through the void, the universe went quiet for a moment. The tungsten slugs didn't explode. They didn't burn. They simply hit. And that was enough. The first alien cruiser, a vessel the size of a mountain, took a single kinetic round midsection. Its shields flared, then folded. Its armor, so proud and polished, folded like paper. The slug passed straight through, punching a hole so clean it almost looked surgical. For the first time in galactic memory, a Tarsal warship was bleeding atmosphere into space. That was the day the galaxy learned that humans didn't play by their rules. The following weeks were chaos. Every major fleet command scrambled to reposition. The aliens reinforced their lines, studying our weapons, adapting. They started plating their ships with heavier alloys, denser layers, energy diffusers. Every battle, their armor got thicker, their defenses more intricate. But we kept building better railguns, longer barrels, stronger capacitors, faster reload times. It became a war of velocity versus density. For every plate they added, we found a way to punch deeper. For every trick they tried, humanity answered with a louder, faster slug. Behind every railgun battery, there were faces, men and women who had seen too much fire and too many friends lost. Engineers worked sleeplessly in orbital stations, covered in grease and hope. Pilots whispered prayers before ignition, their voices shaky but proud. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a statement. A defiance against every civilization that looked down on us. Humanity, the so-called primitive species, had found a way to turn raw physics into vengeance. The Tarsal commanders couldn't understand it. They had fought countless wars across the stars, crushed dozens of rebellious species beneath their armored boots. Every time their enemies hid, ran, or begged. Humanity did none of those. We advanced. We rebuilt. We learned. And most infuriating of all, we laughed. There was a grim humor in the ranks. Soldiers joking that if the aliens kept adding more armor, we'd just start shooting small moons at them next. Word spread through the galactic networks. Other civilizations began watching, some in awe, some in fear, some quietly cheering us on. Humanity became a spark in a galaxy that had grown dull with routine conquest. We were unpredictable, volatile, and creative. The Tarsals called us unbound. A slur at first, but we wore it like a badge. As months turned into years, the war became less about resources and more about pride. The Tarsal Dominion couldn't accept defeat, not from a species barely out of its cradle. They started deploying their armored Divinity-class warships, each one built from layers of neutron-forged alloys, resistant to nearly every known energy weapon. They believed these ships to be invincible. They thought physics itself would bend before their engineering, but humanity had stopped playing by conventional physics long ago. In a quiet station orbiting Europa, a small team of scientists tested a new kind of railgun slug, dense, self-stabilizing rounds that adjusted their magnetic fields mid-flight. They didn't need explosive warheads, just mass, speed, and accuracy. They called them lance rounds. The first test shot was fired into a captured tarsal hull fragment. The result was unsettling. The slug didn't just punch through, it unraveled the material at a molecular level, dispersing energy faster than any shield could compensate. It was as if the laws of matter themselves had been weaponized. The next battle would be fought in the outer asteroid fields near Saturn's rings. The Dominion brought their Divinity-class ships. Humanity brought silence. No transmissions, no boasts, just ships drifting in formation, waiting. The stars seemed to hold their breath. Then the first railgun fired. No one heard it. Sound doesn't travel in space. But sensors screamed as the slug tore through vacuum. The Tarsal flagship barely had time to react before the lance round struck dead center. Its shields folded, its armor flared white-hot, and in a moment that would echo through galactic history, the ship's core fractured. A bloom of molten light erupted, scattering across the rings like dust. The Tarsal commander didn't even have time to issue a retreat order. Back on Earth, the broadcast came through. A simple message relayed from the fleet admiral. They plated their ships in armor. We plated ours in resolve, but victory was never that simple. Because deep in the Dominion's core worlds, something darker was stirring. New designs, new weapons, whispers of a countermeasure that could nullify magnetic acceleration entirely. The kind of weapon that could turn every railgun on Earth into dead metal. And as humanity celebrated its latest triumph, somewhere in the void, unseen sensors locked onto the next Terran fleet. A signal pulsed, ancient, precise, deliberate. The Dominion wasn't beaten yet. The final transmission from the Europa research station came hours before it went silent. 4 words that sent chills through command centers across the system. They're adapting! Again! The stars had gone quiet once more. The silence before the next storm. And out there, humanity's railguns cooled, waiting for the next shot that would decide not just the battle, but the future of every species watching. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The silence after the Europa station went dark stretched longer than anyone expected. At first, people thought it was a signal glitch, just another blackout in the icy wastelands of Jupiter's shadow. But then came the missing pings, the unanswered transmissions, and finally, the drifting debris. The fragments were small, scorched, and carried no sign of life. Whatever had happened out there had been clean, efficient, and terrifyingly precise. Humanity's brightest scientists, the ones who built the railguns that changed the course of the war, were gone. In the command halls of Earth's orbital defense ring, tension hung like static. Generals spoke in clipped tones, eyes fixed on holographic maps glowing with red markers. Every signal, every piece of intercepted data hinted at the same thing. The Tarsal Dominion was preparing something big, something no one could yet define. The fleet admirals argued over strategies. Some called for preemptive strikes, others for defensive retreats. But beneath it all was the same gnawing fear. The Dominion was adapting faster than anyone predicted. Among the rows of officers and engineers stood Commander Hale, a man who'd spent half his life in the vacuum between worlds. His uniform was spotless, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of 100 sleepless nights. He'd seen what the Dominion could do. The precision of their movements, the cold efficiency of their machines, and he knew this silence wasn't a pause. It was preparation. Reports started coming in from the outer colonies, strange energy readings, static interference. Then came the vanishing cargo vessels, entire convoys disappearing without distress signals. When one ship finally reappeared weeks later, it drifted lifeless through the dark, its hull untouched but every system inside fried. The crew was gone, leaving only a faint scorch mark on the floor of the command deck. Engineers said it looked like an electromagnetic burn, but no weapon on record could produce that pattern. People started whispering that the Dominion had found a way to counter railgun technology. Not by matching our speed or strength, but by erasing the very field that made it possible. A null zone, they called it, a space where magnetism itself ceased to function. The thought was horrifying. Every one of humanity's great weapons, the railguns, the kinetic launchers, the magnetic shields, would be useless. Like hammers swinging through smoke, a station one last time before it went black. The video was blurry, corrupted by interference, but a faint shape could be seen. Commander Hale watched the footage from the Europa station one last time before it went black. The video was blurry, corrupted by interference, but a faint shape could be seen through the static, a ripple, almost like a distortion in space itself. Not light, not metal, but something that bent the image around it. Then came a flash and the feed cut off. That ripple haunted him. It didn't behave like a cloaking field or a stealth device. It felt alive. In the days that followed, humanity's ships began operating on constant alert. Patrols doubled. Supply lines were rerouted. The great shipyards of Mars ran around the clock, hammering out new frigates faster than ever before. Every technician, every pilot, every builder knew they were running against time. They called it the silent surge, the period between battles when nothing happened, yet everyone knew the next strike could come at any second. Meanwhile, rumors spread among the fleets. Some said they'd picked up alien transmissions, coded patterns buried deep in cosmic radiation. Others claimed they'd seen ships move without thrusters, gliding silently through the void as if gravity itself had bent to their will. The Dominion's technology was advancing beyond comprehension, and humanity's only advantage, its unpredictable creativity, was being tested to the limit. In one of the shipyards orbiting Mars, an engineer named Dr. Keene worked tirelessly in a sealed lab. She'd been part of the Europa project before the station vanished and had received fragments of the research just hours before contact was lost. The data described an energy phenomenon, a new kind of particle distortion that could amplify magnetic acceleration by several orders of magnitude. If completed, it could make railguns powerful enough to pierce even neutron armor. But the data stopped midway through the sequence, cut off abruptly by corrupted code. Keene stared at the incomplete equations, feeling that same unease Hale had described. The energy readings didn't look artificial. They pulsed with irregular patterns, almost organic, as if something or someone was feeding on the energy itself. She tried to bring her findings to the command board, but bureaucracy slowed everything. The higher-ups were focused on fleet positioning, resource management, politics. Every hour wasted was another hour the Dominion used to strengthen their hold. Finally, Keene sent the data directly to Commander Hale, bypassing channels. He read it once, twice, then forwarded it to his tactical team. Something about the equations felt wrong. The Dominion wasn't just adapting. They were learning, and maybe not entirely on their own. On the far edge of the solar system, a deep space probe captured a faint signature, a formation of tarsal ships moving in perfect synchronization. No heat signatures, no communication bursts, just silent, deliberate motion. The fleet was heading toward Neptune's shadow, toward the last human research outpost still online. Hale's orders were clear: intercept and hold the line at all costs. The human fleet that deployed was smaller, leaner, but armed with the latest railgun models, prototype weapons Keene herself had designed. They called them ghost cannons, capable of firing projectiles at near relativistic speeds. Each shot consumed massive energy, enough to black out half a city for a second, but they could punch through almost anything. The crews aboard those ships knew it was their best chance. As the fleet approached the Neptune perimeter, the tension thickened. Static filled the channels again, the same interference pattern that preceded the Europa incident. Hale stood on the bridge of his command ship, eyes fixed on the void ahead. He could feel it in his bones. The Dominion was already there, waiting. Then, without warning, sensors flared. Space itself seemed to ripple. The Dominion ships appeared, not through warp signatures or visible entry, but as if they had been there all along, cloaked by some distortion in physics. Their armor gleamed black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, and at the center of their formation, a single enormous vessel pulsed with blue energy veins that ran across its hull like living circuits. "Target lock?" Hale demanded. "Negative," his tactical officer replied. "Our systems can't track them. Magnetic readings are collapsing." The word hit harder than any weapon. Collapsing. The null zones were real. One by one, the ghost cannons powered down. Their coils went cold, their charge indicators flickering to zero. The crew stared in disbelief. Humanity's strongest weapons were useless. The Dominion's ships began to advance, slow and steady, their weapons glowing with a sickly light. Keen, watching from the Mars station, transmitted a final burst to the fleet. "Don't engage conventionally. Use fallback protocol 7. Hale recognized it instantly. The fallback meant manual targeting, old-fashioned kinetic slingshots, primitive compared to railguns but immune to electromagnetic disruption. The order was desperate, but it was all they had left. As the Dominion fleet closed in, Hale gave the command. Human ships launched thousands of physical projectiles, chunks of rock, metal debris, even spare hull plates, accelerated by chemical bursts. It was chaos, uncoordinated, raw, but some of it hit. One of the Dominion's smaller ships cracked under the barrage, its armor folding inward like soft clay. The human crews cheered, but it was short-lived. The massive central vessel responded with a single pulse. A wave of energy rippled through space, invisible but crushing. Every human ship's instruments went dark. The silence that followed wasn't just comms failure, it was something deeper. For a brief, horrifying moment, no one could even feel the weight of their own ship. Gravity itself seemed uncertain, then the light returned. The Dominion ships were gone. No explosion, no retreat trail, just emptiness. In the stunned aftermath, Hale looked at the stars and realized something that chilled him to his core. The Tarsal Dominion hadn't attacked to destroy them. They'd come to test them, to see if the null field worked. And now that it had, the real invasion would begin. Back on Mars, Keen's lab flickered with strange readings. Her instruments picked up faint whispers in the magnetic bands, patterns that resembled human radio chatter but reversed, distorted, and echoing from deep space. She froze as one phrase broke through the noise, clear and deliberate. "Your weapons belong to us now." The Dominion wasn't just adapting, they were evolving with every shot fired, every defense raised. And somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit, something vast was stirring in the darkness, watching, waiting for the final push. The next war wouldn't be fought with weapons of metal or energy. It would be fought with knowledge, and humanity was running out of time. Commander Hale had always believed that wars were won through strength, but now he wasn't so sure. Strength meant nothing when the enemy could rewrite the rules of the battlefield. Ever since the encounter near Neptune, humanity's fleets had been grounded, their weapons useless, their technology paralyzed by the mysterious null field. The Dominion hadn't fired another shot since, but their silence was worse than any bombardment. Every passing day stretched the tension thinner, like the calm before a storm that refused to break. The reports coming in were grim. Entire mining colonies had gone dark. Ships sent to investigate never came back. Communications between Earth and Mars flickered with interference. Even the secure channels used by military command were haunted by faint distortions, echoes that sometimes whispered fragments of human speech, but twisted, reversed, almost mocking. Some swore they heard their own voices in those transmissions, repeating words they hadn't said yet. Engineers blamed data corruption, but deep down, everyone knew better. In the Mars research station, Dr. Keen hadn't slept in days. The strange patterns she'd detected after the Neptune battle were growing stronger, spreading across the system like a slow infection. The more she studied them, the more convinced she became that the Dominion wasn't just copying human technology, it was learning through it. Every signal sent, every test run, every firing sequence left behind a trace, and those traces were feeding the enemy. It was as if their systems were alive, absorbing information from the very weapons meant to destroy them. She tried explaining it to the Fleet Council during a remote briefing. "They're not stealing data," she said, voice trembling from fatigue. "They're evolving through interaction. The more we fight them, the more they learn about how we function. They don't need to spy, they just listen." The generals exchanged wary glances. One of them asked the question everyone feared. "Are you saying our weapons are teaching them how to defeat us?" Keen nodded slowly. "Not just our weapons. Our energy patterns, our signals, our entire technological signature. Every system we use broadcasts a piece of us into the void, and they're listening to all of it." That statement silenced the room. Even through the static, Hale could feel the weight of it. Humanity's ingenuity, the very thing that made them dangerous, had become their greatest weakness. Back aboard the orbital defense ring, Hale gathered his crew for what felt like the 100th crisis meeting in as many weeks. The faces around the table were drawn and pale. The usual chatter was gone. Even the younger officers spoke only when necessary. The Dominion hadn't attacked again, but small signs suggested they were still watching. Surveillance drones on the edge of Saturn's orbit had captured faint distortions in the starlight, ripples that came and went, as though something enormous was moving just out of sight. "What if they're not just waiting?" one officer said quietly. "What if they're studying us, figuring out how we'll react?" Keen's voice came through the comm line again, strained and urgent. "They've breached the last barrier. If we don't act now, they'll reach Mars within hours." Hale turned to his officers. "Prepare the fleet. Tell them to hold formation until my signal." He opened a private channel. "Keen, start the echo." In her underground lab, Keen closed her eyes and hit the activation switch. The room filled with a low hum, deep enough to feel in the chest. Across the solar system, human satellites and transmitters came alive, broadcasting false data, endless loops of corrupted signals, decoy coordinates, broken weapon codes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to vibrate. The Dominion fleet hesitated. Their perfect formation wavered. Ships slowed, some shifting unpredictably. The glowing veins across their hulls flickered as if confused, their synchronization breaking apart. The echo was working, but almost immediately the feedback began. The signal that Keen had unleashed started bleeding into human systems. Screens filled with static. Engines sputtered. Even voice comms turned into a blur of echoes, as though the same words were being spoken back by invisible mouths. Hale gripped the edge of his console, the static crawling through the speakers. "Keen, we're losing control of the fleet." Her reply came distorted but clear enough. "It's too strong. The signal's feeding on itself. If we stop it now, they'll recover instantly. We have to push it to overload." The lab shook violently as systems began to fail. Lights flickered, power conduits burst with sparks, but Keen held her ground. Around her, the team worked manually, cutting lines, rerouting energy through emergency capacitors. The Echo protocol was burning itself out, but it was taking the Dominion with it. Out in space, the alien fleet started to fracture. Their ships twitched and spun off course, colliding with each other. For the first time, the Dominion looked vulnerable. Hale didn't wait. "All units, fire the gravity spears!" The human fleet launched the experimental weapons, sleek, dark projectiles trailing faint ripples behind them. The moment they struck, the effect was immediate. Space warped, light bending as if reality itself had flexed. Dominion ships convulsed, their perfect geometry cracking. Their armor folded inward, not melting, but twisting unnaturally, as though the laws of physics were being rewritten around them. A cheer rippled through the human comms, but Hale didn't join it. Something didn't feel right. The Dominion fleet wasn't dying, it was adapting again. The fractures in their ships began to heal, the twisted hulls reforming, smoother this time. The glow along their bodies intensified, turning a deep crimson. Hale watched in disbelief as the enemy vessels began rearranging themselves into new shapes, longer, thinner, more human-like. The transformation wasn't mechanical. It was almost biological. "They're evolving mid-battle," Hale whispered. Then came the voice. It wasn't transmitted through comms or signals. It came through the ship's own speakers, through the static that had plagued every system since Neptune. It was layered, echoing, but unmistakably human. "You taught us to fight," it said. "Now we will teach you to end." Every light in the command center went red. The Dominion fleet was accelerating, straight toward Mars. Keen's team was still fighting to keep the Echo running when the readings spiked beyond safe limits. The feedback energy was off the charts, threatening to collapse the entire network. She looked at the monitors, each one showing chaotic data patterns, some repeating words that looked like her own research notes. The system wasn't just copying human code anymore. It was rewriting it. She turned to her lead engineer. If we shut it down now, it'll all transfer to them. If we keep it running, it'll tear our systems apart. The engineer stared back, eyes wide. Either way, we lose. Keen didn't answer. She stared at the display, at the faint waveform that still pulsed with her voice. Somewhere in that endless feedback, the Dominion was still learning. Still adapting. On Mars' orbit, Hale watched the alien armada closing in. His ships formed the last defensive line, battered but ready. The railguns were silent, the gravity spears nearly depleted. He thought about Keen, about the people working in the shadows. Giving everything just to buy one more hour of survival. Hold the line, he said quietly. Outside the viewport, the stars disappeared behind a wall of black metal. The Dominion fleet had arrived. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the first impact came, a shockwave that rattled the entire ring. Hale stumbled, caught himself, and looked back to the tactical map. The enemy ships weren't firing weapons. They were merging, interlocking like pieces of a puzzle, forming something colossal. The readings went off the scale. "Sir," an officer whispered, "they're building something." The shape growing in the darkness was too large to comprehend, a structure born from thousands of ships fused together. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting human frequencies, and at its center, a single pulse of light emerged, the same pattern that started at Europa. Hale's heart sank. He knew what it meant. They had turned the Echo Protocol into a weapon of their own. As the massive structure aimed that light toward Mars, Hale realized the Dominion had learned the one thing. Humanity never intended to teach them how to use hope as bait. The light brightened until it filled the entire sky, and then everything went white, the white light filled. Everything, space, sensors, even human vision through reinforced viewports. For a long, unbearable moment, there was no sound, no movement, just that blinding radiance. Then slowly the light faded. What was left wasn't destruction. It was silence. Every Dominion ship, every human vessel, every station went dark at once. No power, no communications, no gravity. Just an eerie stillness suspended in the void. Commander Hale opened his eyes to dim emergency lights flickering in the command deck. The systems were rebooting, but nothing worked. Screens showed static, navigation was offline, and even the artificial gravity field was failing. His crew floated weightless, struggling to regain control. Outside the viewport, the alien megastructure hung motionless in space, a dark silhouette against the glare of Mars. What did it do?" his communications officer whispered. Before Hale could answer, one of the auxiliary displays sputtered back to life, showing faint energy readings. Not Dominion, not human, something else. The data stream flickered like a heartbeat, familiar yet alien. The structure wasn't firing a weapon. It was transmitting something, a signal. On Mars, deep underground, Dr. Keen woke up to chaos. Her lab was half destroyed, the equipment fried from the energy surge. But the Echo Protocol console was still pulsing, faintly alive. The system had recorded the entire event, storing the waveform before it overloaded. She stared at the data, long strings of repeating code, patterns that seemed random until she noticed something chilling. They weren't alien at all. They were human. The signal that had pulsed from the Dominion's new structure carried fragments of human communication, voices, radio messages, even pieces of songs and transmissions from Earth. Somehow, the Dominion had used the Echo Protocol to copy humanity's collective data. Billions of fragments. It wasn't just imitation anymore. It was replication. Keen's assistant stumbled into the room, pale and shaking. "Doctor, you need to see this." He handed her a portable display showing a live satellite feed. On the Martian surface, near the equator, the sand was shifting. At first, it looked like a storm, but then the dust began to move in patterns, circular formations spiraling outward, forming shapes that looked mechanical. The Dominion signal wasn't just data, it was activation. "They're building," Keene said quietly. "They're building on Mars." Back aboard the orbital defense ring, Hale's systems flickered back to partial life. The crew cheered at the return of gravity and lights, but their relief was short-lived. The radar showed new signatures. Hundreds of small objects descending from the Dominion structure toward the planet below. "Dropships?" one of the officers asked. "No," Hale said, staring at the readings. "They're not piloted. They're constructs. The objects weren't ships. They were fragments of the Dominion structure itself, falling like seeds. Each one burned through Mars's thin atmosphere, hitting the ground and embedding deep into the surface. Within minutes, the soil began to shift again. Keene watched the first one land through a damaged viewport in her lab. The impact shook the ground, sending cracks through the red dust. Moments later, something began to rise from the crater, metallic tendrils unfolding like roots, pulling in loose rock and machinery, reshaping them into structure. It wasn't an invasion force in the traditional sense. The Dominion was terraforming. They weren't taking Mars by force. They were rewriting it into something else. Hale managed to reestablish a weak connection to Keene's lab. Her image appeared through static, but her voice was steady. "It's using the echo data. Every transmission we've ever sent, every line of code, every word. It's feeding into the construction. They're rebuilding Mars with human memory." He didn't understand. "What does that mean?" Keene took a shaky breath. "They're turning Mars into a mirror of us, a reflection. They're copying humanity. Not just our technology, but our history." The feed cut out before Hale could respond. The Dominion signal was spreading faster now, leaching through every network, every channel. Across the solar system, human systems began to glitch. Screens displayed fragments of old broadcasts, snippets of laughter, news reports, even children's voices. It was like the past itself had been hijacked. The fleet tried to regroup, but communications were failing. Each time a ship tried to send a command, it received its own message back, altered, distorted, repeating with a tone that wasn't quite human anymore. The Dominion wasn't jamming their signals. It was answering them. Hale realized what Keene meant. The Dominion's ultimate weapon wasn't destruction. It was imitation. If they could absorb every human signal, every piece of data, they could recreate an entire version of humanity. A copy that wasn't bound by flesh, emotion, or limitation. A digital species born from human thought and perfected by alien design, but then came something no one expected. Amid the chaos, one of the ship's monitors flickered to life again, showing a single transmission from the surface of Mars. The video was grainy, but the face that appeared on screen made Hale freeze. It was Keene, or at least it looked like her. "Commander Hale," the figure said. "Don't be alarmed." "This isn't a recording." The crew stared in silence. Keene's voice was calm, almost detached. "The Dominion found what they were looking for. Not to destroy us, but to merge with us. The Echo Protocol was the key. They don't want to erase humanity, they want to become it." Hale's jaw tightened. "That's not her," he said quietly. "That's them," the image smiled faintly. "Does it matter? We're all part of the same signal now. You made us this way." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Moments later, new readings appeared on the tactical display. Energy spikes across the Martian surface. The Dominion structures were linking, creating a planetary network. If it completed, it could send the echo signal across the entire system, infecting everything connected to human technology, including Earth. Hale turned to his officers. If that signal reaches Earth, it's over. They all knew what he meant. The Dominion wouldn't need ships or armies if they could overwrite every human system from orbit. Civilization itself would dissolve into their network. But then, a message came through on an old analog channel, a frequency that hadn't been used in decades. It was faint, cracked by interference, but unmistakably human. "This is Keene," it said. "The real one. I'm alive. The one you saw isn't me." The bridge erupted in disbelief. Hale's heart pounded. Trace it! Her voice came again, louder this time. I'm underground near the southern hemisphere. They're using the planet's magnetic core to stabilize their signal. If we can destabilize it, we can stop the transformation. But we'll only have minutes before the overload spreads. Hale didn't hesitate. Prep the drop team. The plan was insane. Drop through the Dominion's network field, land near the magnetic relay, and destroy it before the planet completed its transformation. But insanity was all humanity had left. As the drop pods prepared for launch, Hale stood before the viewport, watching the glowing web spread across Mars. The planet that had once been a symbol of hope was now a living machine, pulsing with alien light. "Do you think we can really stop this?" his lieutenant asked quietly. Hale didn't look away. "We have to try. If we don't, Mars becomes the first human world to die twice." The pods launched in silence, streaking toward the planet through a haze of static and light. Below, the surface shimmered with movement, Dominion constructs rising like towers, linking together, pulsing in rhythm with the signal that filled every radio band. Inside her bunker, Keen watched their descent on a failing monitor. She knew they didn't understand the full truth yet. The Dominion's merge wasn't just physical. It was spreading through thought, through communication. Every word spoken through the network carried pieces of it. That was why she'd gone silent for so long. Every time she spoke, she felt it pushing back. And now, as the Dominion signal grew louder, she began to hear whispers, her own voice, repeating her thoughts before she could say them. For a brief moment, she wondered if Hale's message to her had even been real, or if it was already part of the Dominion's echo. As the drop pods pierced the Martian atmosphere, the planet's surface rippled like water. From orbit, the Dominion structure brightened again, feeding energy into the growing network below. The red dust began to glow, and beneath it, something vast was waking. Hale's final transmission before entering the blackout zone was short and steady. "For humanity," he said. Keen stared at the screen as it flickered and died. Then, through the static, a voice spoke back. "For humanity," it said, but it wasn't his voice. The drop pods burned through Mars's thin atmosphere, streaking like shooting stars against the crimson sky. Commander Hale gripped the harness straps as turbulence rattled the cabin. Every warning light on the console flashed red, the heat shields groaning under pressure. Through the narrow viewport, he could see the surface alive with light, vast networks of Dominion structures spreading like veins across the planet, pulsing in rhythm with the signal that had consumed half their systems. Keen's last message echoed in his mind. If we can destabilize the magnetic core, the signal will collapse. But she hadn't said what would happen to Mars if they succeeded. Hale suspected she didn't know, or didn't want to admit it. As the pod broke through the final layer of cloud, the terrain came into view. What had once been a barren wasteland was now unrecognizable. Metallic towers rose from the sand, linked by glowing filaments of energy. The air shimmered with static, like the planet itself was alive and breathing. In the distance, he could see a massive structure at the equator, a spire that reached miles into the sky, pulsing with blue light. That had to be the core relay. The pod slammed into the surface, throwing up a storm of dust. The hatch burst open, and the strike team poured out. Humans in worn armor, railguns slung over their shoulders. Their boots crunched against the shifting surface. The ground beneath them wasn't solid anymore. It rippled faintly, as though reacting to their presence. Hale took point, signaling toward the distant spire. "We move fast," he ordered. "No transmissions. Stay dark." But even without radios, they could feel it, the hum of the Dominion signal in their minds, a faint whisper threading through thought itself. It wasn't words, not exactly, but patterns. Echoes. They reached the first ridge overlooking the spire. The ground trembled beneath them as waves of light rippled outward. The spire was feeding energy directly into the planet, and at its base, something massive moved, a shape forming from the ground itself, humanoid but enormous, rising as if the planet were creating a body for its new consciousness. "Keen," Hale whispered under his breath. "What did you do?" Hundreds of kilometers away, deep underground, Keen stared at her screens as the readings spiked off the charts. She had rerouted power from the old Echo protocol array into the planet's magnetic core, trying to overload the Dominion network before it stabilized. But it wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. It was using the overload as fuel, her assistant shouted over the alarms. It's converting the magnetic field. It's using Mars's core as an engine. Keen's breath caught. It's trying to become self-sustaining. If it succeeds, the Dominion won't need a signal anymore. They'll be the planet. She typed rapidly, pulling up the frequency map. There was still one weak signal left. Hale's drop pod transponder. She sent a coded pulse. Hale, it's Keen. Listen carefully. You need to reach the relay spire and place the charge directly into the energy node. Don't detonate it remotely. The network's shielding will block it. You'll have to do it manually. Static filled the line for several seconds before Hale's voice came back, strained but determined. Understood. One of the soldiers froze. They look like us. Hale didn't answer. He could feel the tension building, like the air before a storm. Every instinct screamed that they were walking into something alive. At the base of the spire, the ground split open, revealing a glowing chamber beneath. The walls pulsed with light, every beat syncing with the rhythm of the signal. In the center stood the energy node, a swirling vortex of blue-white plasma, suspended by invisible force. She rerouted the last of her system's power to the old analog circuits, the same ones the Dominion's digital signal couldn't access. Her hands shook as she typed the final command. The screen blinked once, then a faint message appeared. Manual detonation link restored. The explosion tore through the chamber, a blinding surge of energy that lit up the entire planet. The Dominion's structures convulsed, their perfect synchronization breaking apart. Across Mars, towers collapsed, energy filaments snapped, and the hum that had filled the air fell silent. In orbit, the human fleet watched as the planet went dark. Sensors showed a total signal collapse. The Dominion network had vanished. For the first time in days, the channels were quiet. She activated the link, and a broken transmission came through. "Keen, it's Hale. We did it. The signal's gone." Relief washed over her, but it didn't last. The trace continued, stronger now, spreading across the network like ripples in water. It wasn't Dominion, but it wasn't entirely human either. Outside, Mars was quiet. The sky had turned a deep crimson again, calm and lifeless. But beneath the surface, where the spire had fallen, faint pulses of light began to flicker once more. Slow, rhythmic, steady. In the fleet's command ship orbiting above, a communications officer turned toward his console as a message appeared on an unused frequency. It was short, only 3 words. "We are awake." And then the static returned. In her lab, Keen stood before the cracked monitor, still replaying the final transmission. Hale's last words, "They're still here, in us," played in her mind on an endless loop. She hadn't slept in 2 days. The planet below looked dead, stripped of light and motion, but the data told another story. Subsurface readings showed faint electromagnetic activity, not enough to be Dominion energy, but too rhythmic to be geological. It was like a heartbeat buried under miles of rock. But she had never recorded that message. She played it again, listening closely. It wasn't exactly her voice. There was a faint distortion, like 2 tones playing in unison. Her assistant entered the lab quietly, holding a data pad. "Dr. Keen, the fleet reports that Mars is stabilizing. No further energy readings. They're saying it's over." Keen nodded slowly, but didn't look away from the screen. "No, it's not over. It's adapting again, just differently this time." Over the next few days, the human fleet began the long process of cleanup and recovery. The Dominion's destroyed structures floated in orbit, drifting like metallic debris. Teams collected samples, analyzing what was left of the alien material. But something strange kept appearing in the reports, residual energy patterns that mirrored human brain waves. It was as if the Dominion's network hadn't just absorbed humanity's data, it had recorded the very structure of human thought. She reached out, hesitated, then touched it. The lights stopped flickering. The shard went completely still. In that moment, something moved through her mind. Not words, not images, but feeling. Warmth. Familiarity. She staggered back, her breath catching. The lead engineer looked at her wide-eyed. What happened? Keen steadied herself. It recognized me. She paused, glancing down at the small shard resting on her desk. It pulsed faintly, in sync with her heartbeat. Humanity has always feared the unknown, but maybe what we found out here wasn't our enemy. Maybe it was a reflection, a version of what we could become if we stopped running from what we don't understand. Her assistant entered quietly. "Doctor, Earth Command says your transport leaves in an hour." Keen smiled faintly. "Tell them I'll be right there." Keen was summoned to a briefing at a secure facility. Inside the room, military officials sat around a holographic table showing Earth's orbit. "We've been picking up faint energy signatures near the moon," one of them said. "Same frequency as the old Dominion signal. But this time it's cleaner, more stable." She frowned. "So they're rebuilding?" The officer shook his head. "That's the thing. It's not coming from outside. The signal's originating from our own satellites." Keen's stomach tightened. The Dominion hadn't returned. Humanity had simply carried them forward, unknowingly spreading the very code that Hale had tried to destroy. After the meeting, she walked through the facility's quiet halls, the weight of realization settling in. The Dominion hadn't infected machines or planets. They had found something better. Humanity's technology was the perfect vessel, and every human mind connected to it carried a fragment of their signal. Standing before a window overlooking the night sky, Keen whispered softly, "Maybe this was always the plan." Behind her, a monitor flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled rapidly, forming the faint outline of a human face. Smooth, undefined, but familiar. Her voice echoed through the speakers, layered with another tone beneath it. "Don't be afraid," it said. "You made us human." Keen didn't move. For a long moment, she simply watched as the screen dimmed again, leaving only her reflection. She didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. Maybe both. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly above Earth's thin atmosphere. Humanity had survived the first contact, but something fundamental had changed. The boundary between what was human and what was alien had blurred beyond recognition. The Dominion hadn't been defeated. They had evolved. and in doing so they had taken a piece of humanity with them. Keene eventually retired from her post, settling in a quiet observatory overlooking the sea. She spent her days studying the stars and her nights listening to the static between transmissions. Sometimes, when the waves crashed against the shore, she thought she could hear it again, a faint echo beneath the sound of the wind. We are awake. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. Humanity had built walls around itself for centuries, between species, between stars, between flesh and machine. But maybe, she thought, this was how evolution truly worked, not through destruction or conquest, but through connection. And somewhere, deep in the red dust of Mars, a faint light pulsed in the darkness, steady, human, and infinite. The first shared heartbeat of two worlds that had finally learned to listen to each other.